Hello and welcome to History Council of New South Wales 2024 First Nations Stories Series. I'm Katrina Dubé, and recently I had the opportunity to speak with Jayne Christian and Heidi Duncan about weaving, connection and caring for country. We hope you enjoy.
We'll now welcome you to country and acknowledge Uncle Greg Sims as my teacher of language and the elder who's permitted me to deliver that welcome today. Tiari mara daraga pemo, koi maria pemo, nagalaringi babuna, banai yamanawaranang, nai disi gai dai yanangami diaralang, nagalaringi tiari nagalaringi nagami gai, gui wiliangana, gunagal da gunagal, dalaloi mugukopalai nangami, disi lalai nei tirimi gunagal, jamia tiari nagalaringi orjumana, Midiga Gorambarak Nadaraga Pemo, Didrigo.
As we take our next steps, remember the ones who walked this sacred land before. This is Darig lands. It is the land of our ancestors. Their spirits still walk amongst us, spirits that have been here since the dreaming. Our language and our culture have been passed down through the generations to continue an unbroken culture that has extended for thousands of years. In the language of our people, we welcome you to the Darig lands.
So my name's Jayne Christian. I'm a Baramatigal woman of the Darig speaking people through the Reed Gold-Spink family line. And this is my cousin Heidi.
My name's Heidi Duncan. I'm also a proud Baramatigal woman whose bloodlines go through Gold-Spink, Reed and Sainsbury lines. So I've been a crocheter since I was 5. So my mum was a crocheter. She taught me to crochet. So when I was working as the Aboriginal health worker in Southwest Sydney, local health district, and I was taking some of my clients to access a women's group out at Preston's. And Annie Dell was out there running the women's group, and that's how I learned to weave. She taught me to weave. I thought I picked it up really quickly because I already had that creativeness with working with yarn. So yeah, I just loved it as soon as I picked it up. And I think I went to the group a couple of times because the thing was to support women accessing services. And then, when they feel more comfortable, then we back off and let them have their journey. So I know that the women were still attending. So I was practicing at home, doing my stuff. And then when I've met up with, just through the years doing it, working out when I moved into the role after I became a social worker, a clinician role, then, thinking of ways that I could bring culture back into my work practice and, that spirituality for some women that hadn't experienced it or hadn't learned to weave. So that was something that I provided to them was, that this is our connection to our country, our cultural practices. So, and then when I got with Mob, it was just a whole big thing again, was like getting back into weaving for myself. I think it's really important that we do share our knowledge with people. I love to share with Mob and other Aboriginal women and men if they want to learn. I taught my little grandson to weave. He loves it. But I think it's important too to share with anyone who wants to learn, because it shows in the broader range that inclusiveness, and also the fact that, sharing cultural practice shows that we were here, we're still here, we know these things, we're happy to share them. And I also think it's always important that you say who taught you these practices, because, it's acknowledging the ones that come before us that, taught us how to do this. The
practice of weaving, I always acknowledge that it's a Nulunjeri style of weaving that we do, and I was taught the weaving in the Wiradjuri community in Wagga Wagga. And over the last 10 years or so, we've been able to bring weaving onto Darig country, our own country, to weave with our own mob, but also the broader community, and using that as a vehicle to have conversations about who we are and that we're still here. But what I like about the practice of weaving is it doesn't matter where you are, it gives you the opportunity to interact with country. And so, when I'm here in Parramatta, there's a lot of lamandra in the parks near the river and native grasses. And we do tend to use a lot of raffia or bush dyeing raffia, but even in the bush dye, you're collecting from country what it is you wish to make your dyes from. And so it's that connection with country and then that you can share with other people that I find has that spiritual, energetic connection.
Auntie Jules, Jayne's mother, had created this colour dye. And so, I'm sorry, how do you refer to it?
It's bush dye.
Bush dye. And do you know how it's made? Or
She'd kill me if I said
it. Like,
she's
okay.
Very. We could talk around. Even when I was just talking, then I was like, "Your mum's going to watch this." No, that's right. No, I get the general. I get the general. But we can just call it bush dye. And yeah, mum keeps her little concoctions to herself, but she actually doesn't tell me a lot of things, but she knows.
I guess for me, like, it's a connection to country, because the dye that you're extracting is from plants that you're using around you or that are around you, like plants, flowers, stuff like that. So it's like, I know, so this one was, I took some of my mandra from country and started weaving it when I was doing cultural practice recently. So it's just that connection. So every time I hold these, like, I have that spiritual connection. So it's part of that spirituality that I'm just connecting to my ancestors, I guess, because I was asking for something. And so then I was giving back. So I was giving a part of my spirit back by weaving country into my weaving. And then I felt that what I asked for was given. It was just this really special moment, because it was just like a confirmation that, you know, you're doing the work, and then you can kind of, you know, you've got to do the work to get the things you want, or, you know, it's like that in everything, right? But innately for me, that moment was to walk on country, to weave on country, to do the work on country, so that then, you know, you can for your practices. So that's kind of what it was like, that spiritual moment for me, this moment. And I'm just building on that now. You know, the purple is a bought product, but as well for me, like, a mental health represents the mauve colour in some of the spaces that I've worked before. So I wanted to weave that in as well. So that also is that spirituality, that, you know, emotional health and wellbeing connection. And yeah, so when I look at this, I know that that's why I made it. You know, this is part of the country, part of the healing, part of the spiritual healing for country.
So the interconnectedness is just, it's so strong.
Yeah.
What about framing time? When we talk about framing time, is it about framing our time together? Is that something that weaving signifies? Is that a special element?
It is, for me, I've got pieces over the years that I've woven, a lot of this darker colour bush dye in these earlier works of mine was done by other community members who shared it at the time. I've also got pieces that I've woven with like a sea sedge grass, but I don't live near the sea. And so because I've got that material in my weaving, it really speaks to the relationships that were there and the sharing practices that happen between people at a specific time. So I feel like in all of my weaving, even the emu feathers, I lived out on Barkindji country of the Wilyakali people around Broken Hill, and I ended up collecting feathers myself from a drive I did between Broken Hill and Menindee, and from an emu that it was deceased. And so I hadn't used feathers in my work until I collected them respectfully. And so, yeah, I find with my own weaving, it's kind of, that's a form of time stamping.
Can I just say something as well?
Yeah.
Like, usually when I finish at work, because my work is, like, previously in the mental health field, And now still so, but more about other people's well-being, you know, and early intervention stuff. But when I go home, I either do some weaving or crocheting. So that's like my mindfulness, like my time out. Or my daughter and grandkids and my younger son lives with us, me and my husband. And the kids know, leave Nanny alone for 15 minutes so she can like do my mindfulness. I come home, I weave or crochet for about 15 minutes, and then I get up and do all the other stuff that I need to do. But it's just a way to switch off, to just be, you know, and do something that I enjoy and I know it's keeping me well, so that I can, you know, then cope with running around 6 and 2-year-old and cats and dogs and chickens and all that kind of stuff.
Being a nanny.
Yeah, being a nanny and a mother and a wife. And yeah. So it also gives me so much, you know, like it gives my well-being so much. It fills my culture cup as well. It's because, you know, I'm with my family, but with my broader mob, you're not with them all the time, you know, so that gives us a connection to mob as well.
And so in that vein, sharing when you're with mob, can you talk about that a little bit and the importance of that, whether you're on country or not on country?
And talk about the cooling cooking.
Oh yeah, that was amazing. So I said that recently I'd had a cultural experience on country, and you know, we were invited, one of our cousins who lives off country, her and husband and her child was going to help support our cultural practice by cutting colourmons. So a whole group of us mob got together. How many do you reckon there was? 20 of us or something. There was you know, mothers and fathers, there was elders in our group, there was young people as well, just a whole group of us. So we went out and we looked at the trees and looked at the land and the country and you know, where the water source was. And it was just a really beautiful, humbling experience to be out on country with your mob, you know, and to practice cultural experiences. It was amazing. So we
and sharing that knowledge where we were traditionally was a meeting place of 4 of the clan groups, including Baramatiga people. And so having the kids there and talking about that and knowing that, you know, they'll remember the time we did that, and that not just, well, you know, connecting to country, but connecting to the memory of what country has always been and how it's served and supported those before us.
Yeah, that's right. And thinking that, you know, our ancestors used that land in probably the same way we did that day. You know, sharing and teaching the young folk how to go about, how to pick the right tree and how to look at the lay of the land and how the river comes through, you know, and the walking track and stuff like that, you know. And I guess that place is a bit colonized, but just still that beautiful connection, spirituality you feel with the ancestors. And my grandchildren were there, so it was really special to share that moment with them.
And I think you mentioned before the sense of belonging when you are practicing weaving and sharing culture and being on country. And so we all know the sense of belonging is something that's uber important for everybody.
It's innately human, isn't it, right? You know, that everyone needs to feel that sense of belonging in spaces that you go. And
Jayne, you were overseas in France, in Paris recently. Would you like to speak about that and about how weaving still connected you?
Yes, so I think in 2023, I was a recipient of the Galang residency that was run for the first time between Powerhouse Parramatta and the Cité International des Arts in Paris. And so while I was there, I was, you know, just connecting, researching, beginning works on an exhibition that was at Blacktown Arts earlier this year, Jury and Revolution. And I think part of it, obviously the practice of weaving, as soon as I arrived there, I continued my practice. So that was a good grounding exercise for me. And I also delivered workshops to the Cité residents. So the Cité has 2 sites that have 150 studios on each site. And so artists who were there for their own purposes came, and it was such an international group because we had all travelled from somewhere. And having that experience with them, teaching them, you know, how we weave and why we weave and what our connection is with country and cultural practices here. And I also did a workshop with the local French community, and I needed an interpreter for that one. But it actually surprised me how the same feeling that you get weaving in weaving circles here, we all felt that there, which surprised me. But I think that really does tap into the human connection. And if anything, the difference I felt just weaving with members of the public is that here in Australia, people have so much conditioning, whether they realise it or not. And so just saying that you're an Aboriginal person here in Australia, you often have to unpack that in different ways because of the conditioning that Australian people have. Whereas when you're international, people aren't hung up on the same things. Some things they don't even ask the same things, or, you know, they might say, oh, well, you're fair. And then, you know, you just explain, oh, well, I've got, you know, Danish and Irish and Scottish and English ancestry, but I'm a biomedical woman. And, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But here, I think that conditioning really comes from the erasure narrative that everyone's been saturated in. And so even when you say something like that, it's still challenged. And so if anything, it was a bit easier for me to have the conversations internationally, just because of the people. But yeah, I certainly still felt that connection that weaving gives me while I was overseas. And also probably the other experience was when I was in France and the UK, I specifically went and saw weaving collections that are held by the museums over there. And I really did feel a connection, even when it was from other areas. Like I acknowledged the Nunangjeri people, but you recognise the styles of the mob from elsewhere in Australia, what we now know as Australia. So even having that connection, touching things, thinking, oh, the only thing that separates me from the hands that made it is time. And, you know, things like twining, rope making, it's something I took for granted a bit before I went overseas. But then I was asked to kind of see if I could identify an object as being from New South Wales, because they thought it was from New South Wales because the expedition come here, but the tag had New Caledonia on it, but the expedition never went to New Caledonia. And I did recognise the plant material, and I did recognise the twining as how we make rope. And so since that particular time, I do a lot more twining now. Like that was a sense of connection I felt in that time and place with that object, that it did make sense to me in a foreign setting. And then realising, oh, all the ways that we do things now, even with other mob, you know, building back capacity in us where that's been lost, it means something.
Just the connection between the generations is amazing. And the fact that you went overseas and were able to identify within museums collection, assuming,
yes,
you know, other mobs work or where it was from, it's just amazing. Jayne, we heard from Heidi the experience she's had about gathering resources and natural products on country, and we heard about your experience with integrating feathers into your work. When you're with a group and when there's a group on country weaving, is there like a standard practice that you would generally do? Do you go out and gather things and then mix them with products you may have bought? Is that generally what people do?
Yeah, it's interesting these days. I always say I learnt to weave in Wagga organically with a group of Aboriginal women, and now, you know, a decade on, there's quite a demand for weaving, and there's quite an organised setup in how you deliver workshops, and that often does require that, you've got a stash of needles and some bought products, even starters. Often we call these little circle pieces nuru, which is a circle in Darug language. And that's, you have to learn how to do that, and that can take time. Usually by the time you make something a bit bigger, you forget how you started it when you're first learning. And so those things we tend to do for people so that they can have the practice experience of just, learning the actual practice of weaving. So sometimes those things become a bit shortcutted. And depending on time, there's not the time to go out and harvest everything. And so we have that ready for people. But that's what I always make people aware of, is that there's layers and layers to weaving. There's the community connection, who you're weaving with, where you're weaving. There's harvesting processes. And, when I was in Paris, I knew I was going to be at the Seine River, and I had thought, I'll just get some grass near the river. And then I got there and it was completely concrete. And I was like, of course it is. And so just those little reality checks, that when I was in Paris, even the lawns, you couldn't walk on the lawn in the gardens, and you couldn't get close to a lot of trees. And so I thought, this is different, isn't it? But then it's okay, because you just switch gears and you think, okay, well, this part of the trip for me isn't so much about harvesting and collecting. It's more about the practice and the storytelling and thinking about the narrative and what the pieces will say when they're made. And so I like that we have, elders who have difficulty with bending down and have lost strength in their hands and arms to harvest the grasses. And so I think that's okay to be able to say, for whatever reasons, at certain points in time, you lean more into one of the other layers of the process than not. And the other thing we have to remember is, over the time, laws have prohibited people from collecting. One community who I've woven with over the years used to access a sedge grass, but, whatever the government was doing there with the water supply killed off all of the spots where that sedge grew, and it took 10 years for it to come back. And so there are reasons why mob don't collect and harvest, either because they're prevented through laws of practice and those things. So, yeah, I think it's whatever the hurdle or obstacle is, just lean into the others. Don't let the whole practice fall down.
What's your next big gig to go out there and demonstrate your weaving?
Weaving. Oh, well, we wove together at the Parramatta Nader.
Yeah, that was exciting.
And Blacktown Arts, when I had my exhibition up, we had a weaving day, and that was good. All of your family come.
Yeah, my mum came, like she was, and even it's beautiful because my mum's a non-Aboriginal woman, as I said earlier, but she's easygoing, mama. Like, she's really flexible. She's Aussie German. But when we left the weaving space, like, and even the NAIDOC event my mum come to as well, she felt she belonged. She said she didn't feel like she was a white woman coming into a black space. She actually felt that, she just felt everyone was beautiful to her. They were welcoming. She heard couple of people saying, "Oh, who's that lady in the elders tent?" And someone's like, "Oh, that's Heidi's mum." And they're like, "Oh yeah, no worries." Like, so she actually felt a sense of belonging, which was beautiful for her to feel.
I guess, a lot of these practices weren't practiced openly, or they weren't able to be passed down because of, the child slavery and the massacres and all of those things that were happening in the early times. And so, what I love about weaving is that it is a cultural practice, and it is what our old ones did. And there's still ways of that knowledge and practice finding its way back to us. And we just acknowledge how that has happened and what the journey's been.
I'd like to thank both of you for your time today. It's been so wonderful chatting with you and getting to know you, which is lovely. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Cut.